Hello, Assalamu alaikum. This is your teacher, Mohsin Azam Khan here. And in today's lecture, we're going to take a brief overview of international institutes, international institutions. Because in international finance, it's important to also understand international institutions that facilitate and help out in smoothing the international finance process and their role. So we're going to go through different international institutions today's class. We will be studying their role as well. We'll take a brief idea that how these international institutions work and how are they helping the countries to integrate with themselves and smoothing the process of international finance. So a brief target for this lecture is knowing the international institutions. Up till now, we do know certain names. You might be aware of certain names of international institutions, but may not be aware of their functions, may not be aware of their structures, may not be aware why are they in place, right? So let's start off. What different structure or what different institution are we going to go through? Let's discuss that. So number one, you must have heard something called IMF. It is also basically an international institute, which is said to be International Monetary Fund, right? So this is an international institute. We're going to understand. We usually hear, countries taking loans from IMF. We usually hear that IMF are putting some conditions. IMF is giving money. IMF is helping out in in different stages if country cannot finance their own expenses. Number two, you must have heard another word which is called World Bank. If you'll understand what do we mean by World Bank, you must have heard the word World Trade Organization. World Trade Organization. We're going to understand or take brief overview of that as well. You must have heard the word Asian Development Bank because being a part of Asia, we'll understand what do we mean by Asian Development Bank. So there are different numerous types of international institutes which are helping, in order to create opportunities for international finance. Like let's suppose if a country like Pakistan wants to sell its securities to the outside world, obviously it would need some big international institution in between which can help them and become a broker through which they can easily sell the securities in the outside world also, right? They cannot go directly into the outside world and start selling it because obviously each country have its own regulations. Hence they will have to go through a official route or an international route, and in which these types of international institutions will going to help them, right? So the most prominent or the most heard or listened in this institution is called IMF. So yes, our focus in this lecture would be greater on the IMF. We'll go through more into the IMF than the other international institutions. So let's understand the IMF. What is an IMF? So this lecture of mine would be based on theoretical elements in which we'll go through an understanding of International Monetary Fund, its history, how it came into existence. So more of that, we'll be understanding the theoretical side of this lecture. So just be prepared to make certain notes or just be prepared, prepare yourself to listen and understand the theory here. The first thing that we'll be going to understand is the history of IMF. If we see the history of IMF, the International Monetary Fund was conceived in July 1944. So it came into existence in July 1944. That's a long time back now. Originally with 45 members and came into existence in December 1945 when 29 countries signed this agreement. So basically, International Monetary Fund was conceived. Conceived means an idea came up in July 1944 with 45 members in hand. But eventually, when it came into existence, when it came into physical state, that was in 1945. By December 1945, it came into physical state, and it had support of 29 countries which signed the agreement that they'll use this bank to transact with each other, right? So initially only 29 countries were involved in it. IMF started to make service with IBRD in 1947. This is another institute, IBRD. So it started off to make service with them in 1947. We'll understand what is IBRD in the later review. The IMF works to improve the economies of its members' countries. So one of the sole objective of IMF is, so if you are a member of IMF, a member country of IMF, let's suppose you are a member country of IMF, and similarly there are many others also who might invest also in IMF. So IMF goal is to improve the economies of, let's suppose your economy is going down. So IMF will provide you guidance, provide you the structure, help you out, assist you in order to, flourish your economy in a better manner, in order to improve your economy. That's one of the aims. We're going to understand the objectives also of IMF later on, but that's one of the aims. The conference culminated in the creation of two famous twins, IMF and World Bank. So a major conference was held between these countries, and ultimately twins were created. With one is said to be IMF, which is the International Monetary Fund, and the other one is said to be the World Bank. We're going to understand both of them, but our current focus would remain on IMF. As we are done with IMF, then we'll move towards World Bank and try to understand the World Bank also. Let's further move on. International Monetary Fund. IMF is intergovernmental organization that oversees the global financial system by flowing the macroeconomic policies of its member countries, in particular those with an impact on exchange rate and the balance of payments. So basically, IMF oversees oversees the global financial system. So basically, one financial system is of a country, and one financial system is how different countries are performing in a globe. So IMF is basically a global bank which is overseeing the global financial system by following which policies, the macroeconomic policies of its members countries. Like let's suppose Pakistan is one member, India is one member, US is one member. So it is also overseeing how economic policies, or how good economic policies, macroeconomic policies are being followed by its member countries. And particularly it is, particularly its focus is on the balance of payments or on the exchange rates, because obviously the biggest hurdle of any country in the international finance is the exchange rate. Because as you know, a country can, print its own money, but it cannot print another currencies. So IMF's I, or its focus is primarily on the balance of payment, which is the current account deficits, How is that being dealt with? Its its focus is on the impact on exchange rates of different member countries, how the country is dealing with that. So we can say IMF is trying to oversee the environment. Next point says it is an organization formed with a stated objective of stabilizing international exchange rates, and two, facilitating development through the enforcement of liberalizing economic policies on other countries as a condition for loans, restructuring, or aid. Very good. So let's understand this. Now, main objective, IMF's main objective. We have gone through two. Number one says it wants exchange rates to be stable. Number one, not fluctuating, it wants stable. And it is liberalizing the economic policy. It wants an enforcement of liberalizing economic policies, which we call liberal economic policies. For that, you will obviously you'll have to research a bit on the liberal economic policy. Like one of the liberal economic policies are that do not manage much your exchange rates. That's against competition. That's why whenever you listen to IMF, it tells your country to let the exchange rate free float as per its demand and supply, because that's a liberal economic policy. Let your exports demand and imports demand determine the exchange rate of your country rather than artificially managing it. Because if you're artificially managing an exchange rate, it will have its own consequences, which may not be good for the economy later on. You might be helping out the economy in the current form, but in the later on, you might not be able to help the economy. Hence, so if any country, like country A, wants a loan and it requests for a loan from IMF. So IMF, while giving its loans or restructuring or any aid, it will give you two objectives. So it will either apply for you to apply to make the exchange rate stable, that is, let the exchange rate come to its real value. So even if you take the example of Pakistan, so whenever Pakistan takes loans from or borrowing from other countries, or sorry, borrowing from IMF, the first thing IMF says, let the exchange rate comes to its real value. That's the key objective, because they know at the current artificial value, your exchange rate is not stable. It's going to fluctuate further on. So they want it to come into its real value. Number two, they want more liberal policies to be applied for economic activity to increase, because they're giving you loans, so they are giving you with condition. So these two primary objectives will be set as conditions whenever IMF will be providing you with a loan, right? So we have got to understand what we understood from this slide. One is that what particularly IMF focus on, which is exchange rate or balance of payments, and what condition do they apply while giving loans. That is, one of them is exchange rate stability, and one is liberal economic policies. Let's further move on. Next, the IMF was created to support orderly international exchange rates, currency exchanges, and to help nations having balance of payments problems through short-term loans of cash. So that was the primary objective of IMF coming into existence. Number one, because there are so many countries and they'll have their own currencies. So you need one intermediary which can make sure for exchange of currencies between the countries. Because whenever the country are exchanging with each other, they are not exchanging in their own currency, they're exchanging in each other's currencies. Hence, you need to make sure you have some international institution which make sure, or we can say, which support orderly international currency exchanges. So like if I want to make any payment in dollars, if a country wants to make any payment in dollars, IMF is there to provide them with dollars. If any other country wants to make a payment in PKR, IMF is there to provide. So what IMF is doing, IMF is smoothening the process of international transactions. One of the goals for it to come into existence. Number two, it wants to help nations which have balance of payments problems. Like let's suppose Pakistan, it has a very big, it used to have a very big current account deficits. Hence, obviously, to finance that, we needed some money. We had a huge disequilibrium of balance of payments. Hence, we needed money. So, IMF is there to support that, and they offer us short-term loans of cash. Like let's suppose if IMF was not there, like just for a second, let's think, IMF is not there. So was it easy for Pakistan to make imports in US dollars? No, we can't print US dollars. Hence, we would not have imported so many US items or different countries' items because we know we cannot make the payment of it. And neither we have any bank which can offer us US dollars to make the payments. Hence, for that purpose, some of the underdeveloped countries' living standards might have gone down. Because if we see developed countries' living standards, they have optimized because of the imports coming from developed countries. So that would have literally affected if IMF was not there. So IMF is headquartered in Washington, United States. So its main headquarters are in Washington, United States. Who runs the IMF? So basically, IMF have members countries. From those member countries, like let's suppose IMF might have many members countries. Pakistan, India, could be Saudi Arabia or USA, UK, Europe, and so on. It can have many member countries. From those member countries, board of governors is extracted and executive board is extracted. So you have two things, board of governors and executive board. Obviously the member country which is offering a huge fund to the bank, because bank runs how the bank runs or any monetary fund runs, it needs money. So the countries which are investing a lot in the IMF, obviously they'll have a higher say in the board of governance. They'll have a higher ratio of board of governance, and similarly they have a higher ratio in the executive board also. So what does board of governors do? They further extract deputy managing director and deputy managing director. So they have basically two types of, they are two deputy managing directors from the board of governance, and executive board provides with first deputy managing director. So basically the executive board is you can say a person, or it's the executive board which decides who is going to be the first deputy managing director. In other words, who's the one who is going to run the affairs of the IMF. And while to make sure that there's also a board of governors to keep a check on executive board, so board of governors also set up two deputy managing directors so that board of governors also know of all the activities that the IMF is performing and whether the first deputy managing director is performing in the right manner or not. So if I repeat this process again, so you have member countries, could be many member countries. From that, two boards are extracted, board of governance and executive board. From the executive board, you get basically a managing director. And from board of governors, you get a deputy managing director to keep an eye that the managing director is performing well and or performing with the goals or the vision of the IMF. That's how IMF is run. So basically, if we can say that in short, IMF is run by its member countries. Pardon me. So IMF is run by its member countries. Some member countries have a higher say, such as USA, such as Europe. They have a very higher say in the IMF. And some member countries do not have that higher say because of their investment amount, because they do not they don't own such stake in the IMF, right? So that's how IMF is run. That's how we operate the IMF. Further, now let's understand the purposes of IMF. We've got an understanding, slight understanding that what functions IMF is performing regarding current account deficit and currency stability. Let's go more into the purposes. What's the purpose of IMF being there? Number one, promote international monetary cooperation. So it helps in, like let's suppose European Union, or let's suppose if two countries want to integrate with each other, want to break the free trade barriers, want to be more in cooperation with each other. Hence, that means there would be more international transactions. That means the two countries A and B will be transacting with each other even more. And obviously, you need some bank to help out in that. Like, as I said, like Pakistan wants to issue a bond in the outside world. So Pakistan wants a cooperation with the outside world. Over there, an IMF will help out that that bond is accepted by the outside world. The IMF can give recognition to that bond, and then bond can be used in the IMF. Right. Two, expansion and balanced growth of international trade. As I just said, no, international trade. International trade requires massive amounts of international transactions, meaning that people have to exchange currencies with each other in order to transact internationally. Hence, to expand, as I said, integration, such as European Union was able to integrate because we know they were able to make one monetary fund. Similarly, if you want to expand, if you want to open your markets to the outside world, you need assistance of IMF for that purpose because IMF have many investors also. IMF have dealings with different countries also. They can help you out in that. Three, promote exchange rate stability, which we have already discussed. It wants to assure that the exchange rates are stable around the world because only a stable exchange rate can assure that stable trade is being done, stable financial transaction is being done, and international finance is booming. Only if the exchange rate is stable. If it isn't stable, then there would be an issue. Four, to eliminate restrictions on the international flow of capital. The IMF, because IMF is there to, you know, build cooperation between two countries. Hence, for that purpose, it its purpose is to eliminate the restrictions on international flow of capital. If someone from USA wants to bring money in Pakistan or invest in Pakistan, there should be no restrictions. Or if there are restrictions, then it should be very low. That's what the IMF wants. And if any Pakistani wants to invest in other countries, similar should be followed by the other countries also. Only that will help international finance to boom. Only that will help two countries to transact internationally. That's why IMF believes to eliminate any restrictions on the international flow of capital. Five, make resources of the fund available to members. So it also make resources of the fund, whatever fund it has, it makes it available to its member if they want some loans, if they want some cash, if they want some bonds, it's available to them also. So if the country is in a difficult situation, IMF is there to offer its resources to those members, to those member countries. So one by one, if I repeat the purposes, number one is international cooperation. Number two is expanding the international trade. Number three is promoting exchange rate stability. Number four is removing the restrictions on international flow of capital. And number five is providing with resources to its members countries. These are basic purposes of IMF to be in existence today. And that's what IMF has been doing up till now. If you follow the IMF policies, that's it's what it's doing. Further, number sixth purpose: help help establish multilateral system of payments and eliminate foreign exchange restrictions. So it tries to help out in a multilateral system of payments. Like let's suppose two countries want to make payments to each other, it will further facilitate. IMF will help out in making that payment, and will try to remove any eliminate any foreign exchange restrictions, meaning that one country cannot buy currency of another country. That's foreign exchange restrictions. So IMF will try to eliminate that. We'll discuss with the country and it will guide the country to eliminate such restrictions. That's why because in China there are many restrictions for foreign exchange also. That's why IMF is at times not happy with the Chinese policies, and that's why they do not have much engagement with each other either. Right? Seventh, shorten the duration and lessen the degree of disequilibrium in the international balance of payments. So it wants, or its purpose is to improve the international balance of payments, in other words, and help out in any disequilibrium in the international balance of payments. So if there's a disequilibrium, meaning that you might be in a very massive current account deficit, hence for that purpose, a country may not have enough funds, may not have enough money to finance that. Hence, for that purpose, IMF will play a role to make sure you do not get bankrupted because of a worsening balance of payments. 8. Foster economic growth and high levels of employment. It also helps to increase economic growth in a country. It helps to guide and push countries to go through an economic growth. So it tries to foster economic growth and high levels of employment. It wants more and more people to be employed. Obviously, a greater economic growth will mean that people are being employed more. Ninth, temporary financial assistance to countries to help the balance of payment, which is being connected with 7. So yes, all those countries which are going through tough, so it provides a temporary financial assistance. What do we mean by temporary? It does not provide a permanent. Like if it is giving a loan, it will give you for a certain period of time, and with the expectations that the guidelines it provides you, you will follow those guidelines, you will improve your economy, and later on you can come out of that financial stress. That's why the word temporary is written. But if long term, if the country is like, let's suppose, let's take a third world, any third world country, what it does, rather than improving itself, it starts worsening itself and starts to waste the money of the IMF that is provided in terms of loans. In that case, IMF is not happy at times, and then at times they also pull back in providing further assistance or financial. And if they provide any financial assistance, they put up some conditions so that their own money can also be recovered, and the economy of the country for which obviously their own money will only be recovered in the scenario if the economy of the country improves. So obviously they give certain guidelines, certain conditions, so that the economy of a country can improve also alongside. So up till now we have gone through 9 purposes of IMF. Now let's understand the role of IMF. What is the role of IMF? One, promoting research in various areas. So it is promoting research in various areas of international economics and monetary economics. So it is giving or promoting research work in the economics section. How does that do that? It provides a whole set of data. So if you go to the IMF website, you'll get data of various types. So that means it is helping out in research work. If IMF was not there, we might not be knowing the problems of Ghana, or let's suppose problems of countries like Zimbabwe, problems for countries like different countries. We may not be knowing that because we do not have that data. But IMF have that data on their websites, and hence that has promoted research work in the international economics and monetary economics. Number two, providing a forum for discussion and consultation among member countries, being in the center of competence. So further, it helps and provide discussion between the different member countries. Like let's suppose one country is going down in economic terms, it can have a very good discussion through the platform of IMF with the another country which is gaining success in their economics. So it also provides, so you can say IMF is also a kind of a platform where discussions can be done. Three, focusing on its core macroeconomic and financial areas of responsibilities. So it is further making countries to focus on macroeconomic issues. At times, countries do not have that expertise to understand macroeconomic issues, to understand financial issues. So over there, IMF can play a big part to help them out. Four, working in a complementary fashion with other institutions established. So, like let's suppose if a country has its own institution, its own huge bank or financial institutions, IMF can complement. That means it can work with them in a complementary fashion, meaning no charges being charged. They can help them out to further improve their, expertise, to further guide them how good policies can be implemented to further improve financial sector or economic sector. Now let's understand functions of IMF. Number one, surveillance, which is like a doctor gathering data and assessing economic policies of countries. So the first thing that IMF functioning is a doctor attitude. What does the doctor does? It tries to identify problems in a patient and then provides him solution how to eliminate those problems. So similarly, IMF is also like a doctor. It is gathering data from different countries and it is assessing them and seeing that are they undergoing a huge problem, then they should tell them, they should inform them. Number two, they provide technical assistance like a teacher, strengthening human skills and institutional capacity of countries. So number two function is also there are teacher also. Teacher means guider, helping out, improving on. So if any country wants to, apply good economic policies, IMF is there as a teacher. They're going to guide them. They're going to help them out and what good policies they can apply on their economy. Third, financial assistance like a banker, lending to countries to support reforms. So there are also a banker. Third function is like a banker. So if any country is going through a very shortfall of cash, IMF is there to provide them money, because we know that a domestic bank does not have a huge capacity to provide money, but IMF has huge amount of funds. So IMF is there to provide a good share of amount of money. So we have three functions of IMF. One is like a doctor. A doctor is very skeptical, pardon me. So it's very skeptical, very alert, very watchful, very cautious. The doctor is trying to find problems in you always. And with that, trying to provide you solutions also. A teacher is there who is trying to develop you, who is saying that if you do certain things, you're going to get developed, who's trying to push to strengthen your human skills, who's trying to push to, enhance your education budget, who's trying to push you, enhance your healthcare budget so that you improve. And with that, it is also a banker. If you need money, if you are full of cash, short of cash, IMF is there to provide you money. So it is also there as a banker for you. So these are certain functions of IMF. Certain collaborations of IMF with different international institutes, such as the World Bank, it collaborates with that. The regional development banks, such as the Asian Development Bank, is basically a regional development bank of Asia. The World Trade Organization, United Nations agencies, and other international bodies. Each of these institutions has its own area of responsibility and specialization and its particular contribution to make the world economy even better, right? So IMF do not perform all its tasks alone. It has collaboration with other institutions so that all the functions that IMF have thought of can be implemented, can be, you know, successfully executed, right? So it also collaborates with different international institutions also. Like let's see some countries quota in the IMF, that each country has certain quota for votes. Let's understand that. So these are basically, we can say, the country's quota for in IMF. So who pays each country's IMF quota determines how much it contributes, how many votes it has, and how much it can borrow also. So these are basically quota. The major contribution comes from the European Union member states, then comes from the USA 17%, then we have Japan, China has a small share, Saudi Arabia 3.2, and we can say as we go down to underdeveloped countries, the ratio will start to decrease. That's their quota, that's their voting power. So the major voting power comes from the European states, but again, that's the European states combined 32%. You know how many European states are there? So not one country have the ultimate power. But if you see USA, that's one country that has 17% share in the European Union. So that means they have the ultimate power of voting of the IMF, and the most important country for the IMF to provide funding to IMF also, and they can have the largest shares. The current managing director of the IMF is Christine. So she's the current, that's the face you usually see when Pakistan at times interact with the IMF. You see that face coming on TV channels or in the press conferences or in discussion with the Prime Minister of Pakistan, because she is the managing director right now, meaning she is the one who takes decisions how much to offer loan and how much not. So, in conclusion of IMF, the IMF works to foster global growth and economic stability. It provides policy advice and financing to members in economic difficulties, and also works with developing nations to help them achieve macroeconomic stability and reduce poverty. Even though reduction of poverty is not a big goal of IMF that we discuss in World Bank, the goal, the vision or the mission of World Bank has a higher focus on the reduction of poverty element, but more focus for IMF is for improvement in the overall economic policy, stability of currency, improvement in the balance of payments. That's what IMF foresees. I also want let's to just go through an IMF executive. Now we know what's IMF executive board now. It's a structure. Completes the first review of Pakistan extended fund facility. See, whenever IMF is providing fund to any countries, it goes through a review that whether the country is fulfilling that what was guided by the IMF. Are they going into the path to which IMF they can be able to pay back the money to the IMF? Hence, they did a review of December 2019 till December 2019. They did a review of Pakistan, which is the 2019 A. In that, they had three key points. Pakistan economic reform program is on track. Decisive policy implementation by the Pakistani authorities is helping to preserve economic stability, aiming to put the economy on the path of sustainable growth as such, which sustains for a longer time period. Number two, its conclusion was transition to the market determined exchange rate has been orderly, meaning transition to the floating exchange rate. Let the market determine the exchange rate. Has been orderly in a good manner. Inflation has started to stabilize. Obviously, this is about December 2019, at which the corona factor wasn't there, mitigating the impact on the most vulnerable groups of the population. The authorities remains committed to expanding these social safety nets, reducing poverty and narrowing the gender gap. So that's what the board of the IMF concluded regarding Pakistan policies, and you can see that, but even in their conclusion, you can see that they are trying to fulfill their purpose, fulfill their. There are many things on this. I would like you to just go through an article of this, which is, review of Pakistan by the Executive Committee of IMF. You'll get an idea of it, and you can have a read of it also. Try reading this also, so you get to understand that how IMF runs or how IMF helps other countries. So this is basically an IMF website, which is the imf.org. And you can, if I click the research button, you can see World Economic Outlook, Global Financial Stability, Fiscal Monitor, External, Staff Discussion Note. They are working papers, research perspective, economic reviews of different countries such as Pakistan. So you can find so many research work data on this. If I go for countries, let's suppose if I want to see Pakistan, I click the P button. So countries will come in, follow up. So SP. So I click Pakistan. They have data of almost all the countries here. So now you'll get information about Pakistan culture. So now you can see at a glance, 2020 real projected GDP is minus 0.4. 2020 consumer price index, which is inflation, it's said to be this much. So you can see country real GDP growth. They have charts over here. You can go through different growths, different GDP. So they have an ample amount of data of each and every country. That's why so if I just click the about button, and if I just click IMF at a glance, so all that what we read in the slides, you'll see that factors coming in: surveillance as a doctor, financial assistance as a banker, guidance, capacity development as a teacher. So you'll see many understanding factors of IMF. So this is IMF for you. So we are done with the most important international institute, which is the International Monetary Fund.